For many, having a disability can be seen as a disadvantage. Well, my guest today wants to challenge that thought. She says that having a disability can actually be an edge for your success. Kristin Smedley is an author and an advocate in the blind community because two of her sons are blind. And once she embraced that actuality and flipped the lens through which she saw this disability, and not the life that they should have had, but now what life they could have, and embrace that, everything changed. She is truly one of the most passionate individuals that I have run across and had the pleasure to interview on the podcast. She is the author of a book called Thriving Blind. She is doing so much in the blind community to break down the barriers, to help organizations and businesses as well understand that having a disability is an edge, and those people could be a benefit for your team. So I'm so excited. Can't wait for you to meet her. Please, let's just jump right into today's episode of You're in Charge, Now What? With author Kristin Smedley. Okay, Kristin, let's just jump right in. Again, first off, thank you for being here. I have watched your journey online, and once you told me, yes, you'd be on the show, of course, I went out and got your book called Thriving Blind, which I recommend to everyone. I will link it in the notes. But really what compelled me was not just the story, and we'll get into that, but it was an admission that you made in the middle of your TED Talk, where talking about your son being blind, and you feeling there was a switch all of a sudden where you realized you were only seeing it through your lens, how you saw his life was going to be versus actually he was embracing the life that he had. And I think it's a really relevant point because I think we do that a lot. We do it in business and personal lives, is we project our own thoughts onto situations. So talk to me about that, because I think that's sort of the real linchpin of this conversation.
Yeah, well, Glenn, thanks so much for having me on to talk about this because, I'm sure a lot of your listeners tuning into a show like this and the content that you provide everybody to make their lives and businesses better are similar to me in you set a goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
You make a plan, you achieve. And a lot of us are high achievers or maybe recovering overachievers, wherever you may be on your journey. And that was me. I always had a lot of success growing up because I followed a formula. I
Right.
was taught you set the goals, blah, blah, blah. So then when I go and my biggest dream ever, I mean, I accomplished everything. I landed the job, married the guy, built the house, everything. And then my biggest one of becoming a mom, and when I'm when you're me, most people just want a healthy child, right? You just want
Right.
to, and then you're me and you're like, okay, healthy child. Then by 9 months, I have 9 months to think about this, and I'm thinking Phillies pitcher, Eagles
Mm-hmm.
quarterback. I've got the big plans, and this beautiful healthy baby comes into the world, and then I hear, oh, and he's blind. That was not in any of the plans. That wasn't in any
Right.
of the books. That wasn't in the research. It was nowhere. And I was so unprepared. I had never been so unprepared. That wasn't my style. So I did for 3.5 years, uh, kick the wall about that and kept trying to drive my agenda and dreams into the situation and see how they could still be possible. And
Right.
every single day I was pissed because it was impossible to have that happen. And then it was that one day, like you mentioned in the TED Talk, it was my Michael coming to me and saying, "Isn't this the best day ever?"
Right.
And when I stopped with my lens and looked through Michael's lens, blindness was not a barrier for him. He just accessed the world differently. And I was so tangled up in, but he'll never, but he'll never, but he'll
Mm-hmm.
never. I was in the work and brilliantly resilient that I do. We call it the could be, should be. Like I looked at it as it should be for so long. I was missing what it could be. And I
Right.
think that we do that in our professional lives all the time. Something happens. pandemic happens, people aren't coming back into the workforce. It shouldn't be like that. We pound our fist, right? It shouldn't be. But then when you back up and look through the different lens and you see what could be, or at least
Right.
be open to what could be, that's when you start to climb out of it a little bit.
See, and I absolutely agree. I think the pandemic, for all of its challenges, I think that forced everyone to take a moment because everybody was on that machine of what they think is important or their strategy or their plan. And there was a lot of success, but it's when you face adversity, you do have two choices. You either buckle into it or you have to figure out a new way to strategize. And again, I want everybody to, I don't want people to get caught up into, the idea of the blindness, but that idea of he didn't know any better, meaning that was his world. And it was a great day. And I remember you talking about him coming and saying, "Mom, are you in here?" And you're like, "Yes, I am." And he's going to play with his toys and he's just having a phenomenal day. And it was our anger and it was our being upset. And I love what you're saying, that idea of, well, it shouldn't be this way, but it is. And once
Mhm.
we embrace the is and we say, okay, how do we move forward? And he became your guide in a weird way, because I remember, him taking your hand and saying, "Come on, we're going," versus you saying, "No, you can't." And I think that's a really important lesson for all of us as we move through our lives.
Yeah, I was just listening to I'll think of his name in a minute, but it's the editor of Entrepreneur magazine,
Hmm.
right? And he was talking about this concept of when something happens and there is a change. Now that was a big change in plans, right? That I'm now going to
Right.
parent a child I have no idea how to parent. But he said we attach, all we focus on is the loss as
Hmm.
opposed to looking at the opportunity. So in that moment that you referenced, when I had that change in perception of blindness, I just stopped that 3.5 year focus on loss and said, well, I have no idea what he's going to be able to do, but I knew that what I could do, what was in my control, was get him all the tools of blindness, get him everything he
Hmm.
needed to access a world not built for blindness. And then I'm telling you, when I sat back and said, let me just see where this kid is going to take me, and the places that we have gone and the soaring he was able to do. And I know that us parents do this with all the love and kindness in our hearts. We put these dreams on our kids that they're going to have bigger lives than we had and
Right.
more opportunity than we had. And I'm telling you, from talking to parents of blind kids, sighted kids, everybody, I do believe that most of our kids' struggles in this world right now are because they are walking. I mean, you imagine a backpack. They've got their dreams and our dreams on their
Absolutely.
back. And if we
Absolutely.
would just take ours out of the bag, watching what they do with their own hopes and dreams and going after and being motivated is unbelievable. And I always say, I mean, Michael's 22 now and he's working full time. He graduated college and all that, beat all the horrible odds that are out there in this world for blind people. But watching him go after this stuff and what he's accomplished, Glenn, I couldn't have dreamt that in a million years. I
Right.
still would have been like, please play baseball, please play football. And here he's done all of these incredible things and impacted all these people, and he's just getting started. But
Exactly.
I had to get the weight of my dreams off of him.
Well, and there's two things that I thought of when you were talking about that, but that idea of, it's a funny thing because my son has challenges too, and that's why I also connected with your story. And people always say to me, "Well, don't you wish he didn't have those?" And the funny thing is I've sat and wondered, what type of person would I be if he didn't have the challenges? Like if everything was quote unquote normal, would I be the person I am? And I'm not even thinking about what person he would be. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about me selfishly. And I go, no, I think I'm a better person because of those challenges, because you have to, exactly what you did in your description is you stopped worrying about your dream. But what you did though was you unleashed your power, right? That power that you said of, I set my goal, I have a plan, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to achieve. But you pivoted it to, well, let me go understand about blindness versus being stuck in the, oh, this is horrible. It's the reality of it is. Let's go out and proactively figure it out. And I think that is an amazing journey because you now unleashed your skill and your gift to provide that opportunity for your sons, both of them, to soar and to embrace and not look at it as a limitation because you stopped thinking of it as a limitation.
You know what? You're exactly right. And I joke sometimes, but I'm completely serious that Michael, having that moment where I changed how I looked at things,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't change me as a mom. It made me a mom. Because
Mm.
honestly, I would have been through my life as the freaking cruise director. I'm making your plans and here's what we're gonna do every day, right?
Right.
And that's not what a mom is. That's not what a parent is. A parent is the guide. A parent is, let me get you access to the tools you need for your life. You're the hero, not
Right.
me. And so that I've often said that moment made me a mom, did not change me as a mom. And from that moment on, and people say, you're the greatest mom. No, I'm a mom.
Right.
I finally started fulfilling my role in the way that a parent is supposed to be. And
Mm.
I say that, not that parents need to go, oh, I'm terrible, I don't do that. We just have that innate, we want to do it for them because we're older, we know better, we know about this world, and the world sucks, and you're going to get hurt if you try that. But when you back up and stop being the cruise director and let them figure that out, and it's hard. I mean, oh my goodness,
Absolutely.
when they go through their dating lives and you watch who they're dating and you're like, well, this is going to be a train wreck, But then you just have to back up and say, okay, I'll send you a good country song when that doesn't work out,
Exactly. But to your and again that idea of taking your dreams off of your kids and you mentioned sports and both of your sons play all your children played sports and I remember I think in your TED Talk talking about you played sports as well. You were
Mhm.
soccer I believe it was. I had to learn. I read a book about coaching and a gentleman saw it on TED Talk talking about how 85% of kids stop playing organized sports by the time they're 14 because of the pressure the parents put on them. And when they interviewed parents to say, what do you want your kids to get out of sports? Of course, it was discipline and learning and teamwork. And when they asked the kids were like, cool uniforms. I want to have fun. I want to hang out with my friends. And there was such a disconnect. And even that idea of when your kid's done with a game, of course, you want to help them. Well, you should have done this. Hey, I loved what you did that. And all they want is ice cream because they forgot. And even out of the goodness of your heart, and that's why I want folks to hear that is even what you're saying is that God, out of the goodness of your heart, you want to help your children. And in some ways, they have to fall down. They have to figure it out. They have to figure out how to pick themselves up. So get out of their way. Give them the skills to be good people, but sometimes they got to run into the wall. You're going to be there to pick them up. But I think
Yeah.
that's really hard. Like you said, it's really hard. And I think it's amplified when you have a child with certain needs. You go on to hyper protection until you realize, you know what, we may be doing more harm than good.
There's so many points in there that we could sit and talk about for days, but the whole concept of youth sports, right? The
Mm-hmm.
whole thing about like parents want them to win, 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 but all the learning is in the loss. All the
Absolutely.
learning comes from when you lose the game and you talk about everyone saying, well, kids aren't resilient. Kids aren't resilient. Then stop forcing them to win. Because if they're always going to win, they don't know what to do when there's a lot. They don't realize they got to go back to the whiteboard and back to the play and look at what went wrong. And I'll tell you what, Glenn, my daughter, who is now a senior in high school and is looking at getting offers from colleges for basketball. I was a lifelong soccer player, coached her for
Mm-hmm.
her whole, juvenile years in soccer, and then our world went upside down and inside out between soccer changed the ages and she had to move up
Yes.
to this team that was very toxic. And she had always been with a really nice group of girls. And my marriage ended and things went off the rails, right? So here's my 11-year-old comes to me and says, everything in my life is out of my control.
Mm.
What is in my control is I don't want to play on this soccer team anymore because that's the only thing that I can say no to. I'm not
Right.
being forced to, and I was like, but I said, I just sat at Starbucks all day for Carly Lloyd holding your place in line, and now you're gonna walk away from soccer. And she said, I can't do it anymore. And she wanted to just play for this one basketball coach who is the most phenomenal. He's just a good person,
Right.
and let these girls figure things out. They had 50-50 seasons all the time. When there was a loss or a play didn't work, the girls would sit and talk. And I'd hear
Right.
them say things like, you're not strong going left, but you are incredible going right. So we're pairing it. And they worked it all out themselves. And then
Hmm.
my daughter fell in love with that sport and gives it everything she has. And I watched that TED talk where he said, all you say is, I love to watch you play.
Yes, that's the one. Yes, that's the
Yes.
one. And
I
I
love to
started
watch
doing
you
that. I
play.
used to tell him, that completely changed my philosophy. And I would tell my son that I love watching you play, or we would set goals before we went there as we're driving, because he played baseball and soccer and basketball. I said, what are your goals today? He goes, number one is have fun. I said, okay, what's your next one? Play as hard as I can, do the best I can. I said, great. What's the third one? Listen to my coach. And that was it. And so when we
Yeah.
were done with the game, we never talked about the score, never talked about plays. I said, did you accomplish your goals? He goes, yep, I had fun. I did this. I did. And that was it. And then we never talked about it again. But what I found was hours later, a day later, he would come to me and he'd say, Dad, on this play, but it was him reaching out. And I think, and that actually taught me a lot of how to interact with people, even in general, but especially, my employees or other people when I'd go in and consult with, companies. It was allowing them to find their own path to the question, be there for them, guide them. But when you tell everybody what to do, the walls go up. But if you extend your hand, all of a
Mhm.
sudden they find a way to come to you with what you want, but it's on their terms. And then real communication can begin.
And there you go. That's it. The real communication. I mean, between our kids, between coworkers, between people that you lead on your team, it's communication. And in my presentations a lot and speeches, I talk about because people always ask, the boys were on regular little league baseball teams
Mm-hmm.
and they both won championships. I mean, they're 3.5 years apart in age
Right.
and they won like 3 years apart. And everybody says, how did it work? And I said, honestly, it comes down to communication. There
Mm-hmm.
was two adaptations that the little league team made. One was that the boys were able to hit off a tee. Now there was a
Right.
conversation with 9-year-olds. We don't hit off tees anymore. My son was like, I want to swing at pitches like everybody else. I said, that's great. But they're going to throw 3 pitches and you're never going to see them. You're going to swing and miss and you're out because we're not changing that rule. It's
Right.
not you can swing until you hit it. There's 3. How do you want to help your team? Right. And took Michael an overnight of thinking about it. Then he said, fine, I'll hit off the tee. But the other one, this was the important one, that they played in the outfield with another guy, another player. And I always say I put them in the outfield because I spent so much money on their teeth on braces that there was no way I was risking an infield hit to knock them
Right.
out. So so they were in the outfield and this was beautiful, especially as we're talking about youth sports and parents that don't shut up on the sidelines, right? The parents learned real quick that when there's a blind kid in the outfield playing with another guy, what would happen was the ball would say come out to center field where they were. The sighted kid would field it and give it to, say it was Michael out there, and hand it to Michael. Where the play was, that one guy, if it was second base, one guy would call Michael's name and Michael could throw it on a dime to him from wherever
Right.
he was listening. But the parents, nobody could make a sound or Michael wouldn't know where to throw it. So it was absolutely wonderful for all the parents that would scream and yell and holler all kinds of stuff. They just had to shut up
Right.
so that we could make the play. But that communication, and then little by little, I actually there was a moment when the dad that I was so nervous bringing Michael with his cane and all to this team, because there's this dad with the star pitcher and all, and he was like,
Right.
what is
Right.
happening here? Like, I'm like, I swear it'll be fine, it'll be fine. At the end of the season when we won the championship in extra innings, that dad came to me with tears in his eyes. And he said, Kristin, I had my biases about this when you showed up. And he said, and all of our kids are these, these spoiled kids that get everything they want in this town. And he said, and your son, one inning at a time, one player at a time, changed everybody's view of what this should be.
Right.
And it was unbelievable to watch that transformation of all of these kids, and really what a youth team is supposed to be, right? With the communication and the cheering each other on, and okay, you can't see the pitches, so you use a tee. Okay, that's cool. Just it was really quite a learning experience.
You got me choked up here, but I want to pivot, because what that just showed me, and I know this is a passion of yours, because all of those biases are in the workplace. And as you said, there's such a high unemployment rate for people who are blind. And it's a combination of why do I don't want to have to deal with the changes, or I don't have time. I mean, there's could be a million reasons, more than I do. But talk about that. What's the failing of all of us in business for this? And do you see any movement or change? Because as you said, your son's working, but I believe the statistics you were saying in some of my research is almost 80%, 75, 80% of the people who are blind, maybe it's a little less, are unemployed.
Yeah, it's 70% is the unemployment rate that's been sitting there for entirely too long. 85% is the dropout rate of college of blind kids. And I have one in now and one graduated. And the study was just released in 21 from Retina International that the cost of this unemployment and mental health and all of the things of blindness to the US and Canadian economies is $31.7 billion. That is, but I'll tell you what, Glenn, I am telling you with 100% certainty from all the things that I've seen and done and research and whatnot, that $31.7 billion, the majority of that is this bias that blind people are less than, blind people couldn't possibly, blah, 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 from the general public and the employers. But the saddest and most frustrating part of this is that the people that are blind themselves believe this because they've been fed this for so long.
Right.
So it's this combined issue of, it's not like we've got 21.7 million blind people that are saying, I can do anything, just give me a chance. It's not happening because they've been fed this. And to your point of, and what's being done about it, this is where I get a little fired up. I was just in a meeting for the short film that we have coming out about this, because there are agencies and organizations that have been around for 100 years and nothing's moved the needle on this. Why is that? Why is it not move the needle? The blind community is very siloed. There are organizations that refuse to talk to each other. There are state agencies that have told blind people, don't mess with this because you're getting a reliable check every month for being disabled. Nobody likes the disruption. But now, look, my heart hurts in a lot of ways for things that the pandemic caused in my family, in economics, in communities. But one of the most beautiful things that has come out of that is people are open now to a different point of view.
Yes.
They're open now to say, we've done things the same for so long. I'm ready to see a pivot. And this is the moment when I can see that the tipping point is going to happen. And think about it. My son is 22. My oldest son, all the kids that grew up with him, they see blindness the way I see it. It gives somebody an edge over everybody else. They watched people out-achieve them. They were on the baseball teams, the football team, the wrestling team with him. They're like, wow, if you're blind, you really have an advantage in this world. It's a new way of thinking, Our kids are
I agree, because I think to that point, I mean, my company went fully remote, and we've stayed fully remote. Now we still have an office and we downsize, and people will go to it if they feel like I need to get out of my house. I can't stare at my own four walls. But it's allowed us to hire also around the country, because we decided, where my brother, who's my partner, was so entrenched in people have to be in the office. And I was like, no, not really. We'd have arguments. And now it's, oh, I love remote. And so, it becomes that pivot. So to your point, I think individuals have a lot of choice now, because there are options where they could work remote, they could go do, gig economy. There's a lot of differences, but I still think it has to be the business owners and the organizations that look at this labor pool. And it could be, I'll plead ignorance, is you don't know that labor pool is available, or how to access that labor pool. And so I think it's both, from an education standpoint from the community. But to your point, is if everybody's siloed, or everyone's told don't rock the boat because then you're going to lose X, then that goes back into, well, at least I have this, versus, well, what could I get? Right? This is what I should get. What could I get if I had the opportunity? So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to, excuse me, to help this. And I think what you're doing, bringing this to light, is amazing, because that's a lot of labor. And to your point, is a lot of very probably hardworking, educated people who just want a chance. And we have to figure out ways to communicate that message out there.
And it's interesting. So the short film that we're putting together is a short and a long, and we're debating these topics of title. But the working title of the one is The Edge. So in my opinion, from what I've seen, successful people that are succeeding without sight, and my sons watching how they've done things, people think that someone that's been blind since birth has such a disadvantage, and I see the advantage in. I mean, you think about the top 5 things you're looking for in a really great employee: the problem solving skills, the creative thinking, the teamwork, and knowing how to get along, and charisma. All of those things, my boys perfected that for years in K to 12. They've had to deal with teachers with all the things, right? And they were managing their education teams by high school. That's why they can go through college, and they are so much better prepared for college than the average kid stepping on a campus, because of all the work they've done
Right.
leading up to that. But not only do they have those top skills, and they've been practicing them and fine-tuning them for a long time, when a company hires somebody like that on their team, they then end up with a competitive edge, because now they've got the top problem solver, creative thinker. But to your point but people say, that must be expensive to have a blind person come in, or how are they even going to get to work, and how are these, because I have one kid that loves to go into an office, and one kid that loves the remote issue, right?
Right.
So really, and that whole term of reasonable accommodation scares the crap out of people, that means expensive, that means lawsuit, that means. And then you have a thing like Salesforce, that tool that so many people know, that's fully accessible to screen readers for the blind. So there are blind executives all over the country and the world that are using that tool. And I'll bet you $1 million there's people on their team that don't even know that they're blind,
No.
because they can access it. The barrier is removed. So now, like, the biggest thing that we have coming is the short film and Thriving Blind Academy, to put this out there of, when all things are equal, when that reasonable accommodation that is not this mega thing that you're so scared of, when that's in place, then you watch the blind employees, when all things are equal, start rising above and give you that competitive edge. It's a concept that I'm telling you, before the pandemic, people were looking at me like, what are you talking about? Now that the world was flipped upside down and inside out, and there's new lenses that people are looking through. Oh, okay. Tell us more about that.
No, and I think you're absolutely onto something, because, as you said, the pandemic forced everyone to take a moment and rethink. As we started out the conversation, instead of, well, this is the way it's always been, you've had to say, well, we have to think differently, or else we're going to go out of business. A lot of my clients, I have a lot of automotive dealers, and so some of them were in the the New York, New Jersey area, and they were shut down. And they're thinking, we have to sell. How do we do this? So all of a sudden they solve problems. And I think and they haven't gone back. Some of them have fallen back, but a lot of them continue on going, well, what's the next challenge? Because things were shaken up. I think the more that you can dispel those myths of cost and how is someone going to do this and sell them on, well, what's the win for you? And realistically, there's accommodations already out here. It's not something you have to create. They're already here. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, okay. Very similar to the coach that you spoke about your son's team. Over time, you now just look at them as part of the team. It's no different than someone who has a specific skill in one department and a specific skill in the other department. And you just say, fine, I want them on my team. I just think the more that we can allow organizations to understand this labor pool is out here, and they will give you that edge. And I love the title of it. I think that's an amazing opportunity. And yes, even there will be people that you're going to have to win over in the community to say, you can do this and not fall prey to, as long as I get my check, I'm safe. But I think there's so much upside. And I think you're right. This is the time because everything's a little bit on its head. So why not?
Yeah. And I think it's important too for companies and organizations to also take a look at what they've been doing so far and where can they remove barriers. Like I'm thinking, Michael is at his dream job at Disney. He's in the live entertainment. He's a sound guy. This kid, he actually has a financial advisor now. Well, that must be nice, at 22 years old. And that guy's calling me last weekend. I'm texting Michael. I said, hey, you gotta call this guy back. And he says, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not taking calls for 2 days because I'm hanging out with Darius Rucker and his crew because he's setting him up down in one of the parks in Disney World. That's what he's doing right now. But when he got into that job 2.5 months ago, the reasonable accommodation was the screen reader software for the company. The company insists that you use their laptops. Well, they needed this $200 program. The amount of offices that Michael had to call to make that happen. And then it turned out it was the IT department holding it up. And they said to him, well, we have by law 4 months to make that accommodation. And Michael's boss actually called them and said, I just went on the website and downloaded the program. Get on there and download it. But it was another month and a half before they went through all of their system to make that happen. Now, what does Michael do? He is so motivated. This is the job of his dreams. He had workarounds. He's like, I've done this before. All these different workarounds in his own technology and asking for help from a coworker, like all of those. So then, the boss is like, wow, when you have that accommodation in place, what are you going to be like?
Exactly. And that is the frustrating thing because that is a default, what you just said. And folks listening, I would look at your own businesses for this, but that person saying, well, we have 4 months versus let's get it done right now. That idea of, well, I have 4 months, so it's not a priority when this could move your business forward. This could help your team. I mean, that's incredibly frustrating, but it happens a lot because everyone's in their own little silo and it's very frustrating. But to your point, I don't see how your son's boss wouldn't be excited to say, man, if I can get you this done, I'm going to unleash you on this. And what about this? And it seems like the way his brain solves puzzles or challenges, everybody's going to want him to, move up and address this. And almost now the edge is whoever has Michael on their team is going to win.
Exactly.
Pretty amazing.
Exactly. And that actually, his professor at Penn State that knew Michael's current boss and introduced the two of them, he said to him, I don't know how he figures stuff out, but wait till you see what this kid is going to do for your department. Like he spent 3 years with them and he still says, I have no idea how he did the stuff he did, but wait till you see what he's able to do. Yeah. And then that's the thing. And the department rising to the top. But, even to take this out of the blindness world, think about the biases that we grew up with. I mean, I'm a single mom now. I grew up with that bias of, oh my God, a single mom is like tired and overwhelmed and too much. Now I'm like, you want something done? Call a single mom, right? Like
Right.
3 kids full time, downsizing. I'm managing budgets, 3 college tuitions, doing this myself. And you got a problem? you call me.
Well, they always say that is the old saying is if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, I know how to prioritize now. Same thing we were talking about earlier. Would I be the person that I am now had that not happened 5 years ago? No, I wouldn't. Now I'm like, I can be much more efficient. I've got 5 massive projects happening all at the same time, not overwhelmed, energized. It's very different now as I've watched us being able to handle downsizing, moving, colleges, and you know what? But the thing I do have to mention in this, and it's important for everybody to understand and implement this in their own lives, is you have got to build a team of some really cool people
Mhm.
around you and lean on them. And I don't care if it's 2 really great people or 20 that are really great, but the things that I've been able to do because I've got people that I can call and say when I'm stuck in family court and my podcast partner lives near the high school and picks up my kid from SATs, those kinds of things
Mhm.
are life-saving, right? It
Yes.
keeps your mental health in check, it keeps your productivity in check, and it's a give and take. My son Michael actually was the valedictorian at Council Rock South for his graduation, and his speech was about building a team, but he added at the end, he said, but you need to also have your head up and see who needs you on their team.
Right.
Who do you need to be out there helping as well? It's a two-way street. And I think if we went about things a little more like that, we wouldn't have the struggles that we have, or it wouldn't take us so long to come out of them, right?
No, I agree. People have, and I'm sure they've said this to you too. I had people with, my son who went through his, he had chemo, and people were like, how do you deal with this? And they'd look at you and put you on this weird pedestal saying, how do you deal with that? And I'd say, I use the word shit scale of life, so we have to watch our language, but meaning that where I am, there's people looking up at me. But I'm looking up at someone else and saying, wow, how are they, doing what they do? So it is that support. Someone's always reaching their hand back to me to help me. So it's
Yeah.
incumbent of me to reach my hand back and help someone else. But I agree with you. You can't do this alone. You need those people that just to call up. And I have a circle of friends who I call up and they'll just say, how you doing? I'm like, I'm not doing well. My brain hurts. I
Yeah.
got this. And it's just allowing that space for someone to just listen and then go, what do you need? They're like, nothing, just needed to vent. And they're like, okay. And then they call you, or to use to your point is, I need someone to pick someone up. I need to be able to do this. I need some. It takes that, but to your point is, you have to be willing, and I love what your son said, picking up your head to see who you can help. It is a give and take. It's incumbent on us to be able, and what you're doing with just sharing your story so beautifully, and so openly, it it has, I'm sure, impacted tons of people. I mean, it's impacted me, hence why we're here. But it's impacted me beyond that, not just a connection of children with, some disabilities, but it's that idea of it's okay. That's your world, and it's taking control of it and not letting it burden you down. But more importantly, being an example to others and help them through their struggles. It may not be their son is blind, but their kids probably have some struggles and they may need your
Yeah.
counsel. Like you're saying, let's not get caught up in that. Let's talk about just raising kids in general at 15, 16, 17 and sending them to college. There's so many similarities that we can help each other and share with each other that there's a lot of times we don't. And I think it's really important that we do.
I think that as I look back on stuff, one of the pivotal moments in my life where I see it where it took off to soar to where I am now is when I had the opportunity to write the book, because I was still kind of stuck in I was supposed to have this other life, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And it kept coming around in all different ways about writing this book. And as we were joking before we hit record, I mean, I still have, there are still English teachers all over this county that can't believe I shut up long enough to write something and didn't just talk my way out of something. But it was a moment of, I just had this, and I know it was nothing other than a divine moment where it was like, look, I was still so mad that there was no resource when I heard that diagnosis. There was nowhere to go. And now I had met so many people on my journey that were succeeding without sight and taught me how to raise my kids. Who would I be if I didn't turn around and be that resource I was so mad I didn't have. Right. And that was a struggle for me to sit down. And honestly, the most interesting part of that, without getting like too deep and philosophical, it was when there was a short window of time that my ex-husband had some custody of my kids. And I was so scared and devastated about that, that I was about to lose my mind. And that was the moment when it became, who am I to not be the resource I never had? So I wrote Thriving Blind on the 2 nights a week that I didn't see my kids for a couple of months. And then that becomes one of the most impactful things that's ever happened in the blind community, right? It kept me sane and being productive and having a level head when my kids did come home, that I could just, love on them and give them everything they needed. And it just, I thought, wow, here I am, okay, agreeing to be of service, but really that book, writing it, served me. It was an incredible cycle how it came to be.
Sure. I'm sure it was very cathartic for you to write it. And again, I so highly recommend this book and watching the TED Talk. I'll link it all in the show notes. But just your introduction, talking about it, just the way I love the way you write, and the interviews with the individuals in the book are phenomenal. Like really amazing people. Like the things they've accomplished. The teacher who's teacher of the year. Just wow, just unbelievable. But your story of going into that auditorium and seeing the two different children and how they act, and then just people reaching out to you to help you, and that openness is just going, it just made me go, I didn't have that situation, but I had that situation walking into CHOP, and I had that like, whoa. And then the flip side, it's 6-8 months later, I noticed those people coming in with the deer in the headlights look, and you just went over and said, okay, I'm going to help you through because someone was there for me. And I think that's what this book, and I'm sure it's had such an impact, and what your passion is and what you're doing. It is a resource for people to just believe that there's more on the other side. And I think if people can get out of that, what it should have been, into what it could be, I think this book and what your mission is just, man, and I'm telling you, everybody, I don't care what, you don't need to have, disability or whatever, just read this book, because this will get you out of your own head to stop blaming the world about what your life should have been, and really embracing what it could be and moving yourself forward. So bravo, really, really appreciate that.
I appreciate that so much. I'm like beside myself excited now that is becoming a children's book. Now, what it did for you in terms of how it opened your mind and all of that, imagine that now for first graders, that they never develop a bias about challenge in the first place.
Exactly. And what I love about this is that it can be, the challenge in this story just happens to be blindness, but this challenge, it could be anything. And it opening up people's minds to, it's just their challenge. You have challenges. Everyone has a challenge. It could just be, your challenge could be, I don't like speaking in public. Okay. Your challenge could be, everybody told me I was stupid. My challenge was, everybody told me I was great and everything was easy, and now it's not easy. I mean, a million different things, but it's this idea of not looking at others as a, they have disabilities, realizing they have an edge on you. So, you better pay attention. You better pay attention, because they might have the edge. You think you have it all sewn up, and they have an edge. So I really appreciate that. So, as I wrap up with this, I usually, we'll get everybody how to connect with you, but I usually ask people a few questions at the end that are just random questions, get to know you a little bit. So just don't overthink them, just jump right in. So first one is, I like asking this question a lot of people, because it gives me a good perspective. So your daughter right now, 17, looks like she's driving, but like we were talking about, I'm fascinated with that 10th, 11th grade mentality, 15, 16. So if you looked backwards at the 15 or 16-year-old yourself, what's the trait that's still there? Like that's been there the whole time. And then on the flip side, if the 15, 16-year-old version of you saw you now, what would they be most surprised at?
This is such an interesting question because I had to go back and uncover all of this when I was in the deep pit of fear and sadness with my divorce. I actually went back to when was I the happiest? It was when I was 10 years old and playing soccer. So I play soccer 3 times a week now.
Mm-hmm.
My nearly 51-year-old knees are not happy about that, but whatever. Um, but I would say 100% that 15, 16-year-old Kristin was the most optimistic person ever. And I am still that way now. That disappeared for a while,
Mm-hmm.
but it's back. And that I realize is my biggest fuel tank. Like I've joked that my memoir could be called Deliriously Optimistic because that is the fuel that's what keeps me on these, gajillion projects and working 16 hours a day and loving it.
Okay. And so what would the 16-year-old Kristin see in you now and go, wow, didn't expect that?
That I'm raising a really good basketball player because I was terrible. I
That's
was recruited
funny.
for basketball because of all my other sports skills, and the coaches, I'll never forget their faces. They were in shock that I could be that bad at basketball. But to be, she'd be really shocked that I have raised two very successful blind sons and a sighted, oh my gosh, and a sighted daughter that all three of them are incredible humans, even with all of the challenges. I don't even think that 15, 16-year-old Kristin could imagine the stuff that we've been through and that I'd stay as optimistic and smiling.
That's
And
good.
that her parents are really, really cool people. She didn't think so back then.
All right. So give me something that you're reading or listening to that's inspiring you that you'd like to share.
I am 100% obsessed with Lewis Howes and the guests on
School of
his
Greatness.
show. What's that?
I think it's the School of Greatness. Is that the one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's because he's really diving deep lately into how your brain works
Mm-hmm.
and the stuff that we're not just putting in our brains, but the stuff that you're eating. I'm really learning a lot as I'm about to turn 51 about how my brain works best and the fuel that I really do need and the things I don't need. If that makes
Great.
sense. But
No, I love his podcast. I love the way he interviews and the style. I've picked up some traits from him, so I'll be happy to say, Lewis, thank you very much. Okay, so let's talk about one place that you haven't traveled, because now that you're speaking all over, it could be the world. One place that you haven't traveled yet that you'd love to go to.
Italy keeps coming up to me, and this is what's so funny, Glenn. Before I went to Vancouver to speak at the big Vision Research Conference right before the pandemic, and they featured my TED Talk and whatnot, I had never left the United States. And my oldest son had been to England, like and I had no desire. I'm like, I don't know anything about anywhere else. Like it was enough for me to move out of Philly to the Midwest for a little while. I had to come back because I didn't understand it out there. But I didn't want to travel. Now I feel like when I did Vancouver and back by myself, and figured it all out, customs didn't quite understand. I just acted like this goofy Philly girl that I just kept saying, I don't know. I'm a Philly girl. Could you help me?
Right.
And everybody thought that was charming and fun. So whatever. After I did that and I started realizing, man, the Vancouver harbor itself is so gorgeous that I
Yes.
was like, I need to see more places like that and experience more places. And interestingly, my boys love to travel because I think that the disconnect is we see the pictures and we read about, they like to be in a place and hear the people's accents and feel the temperature. They just like to experience it fully. And I was never really super up for that. Now I'm like, oh, I want to do that too.
Yeah, Vancouver is one of my favorite cities. I've been there multiple times.
Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous.
Gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. All right, two more questions. If all of your close friends, family, people who really know you, I put them in a room and said, describe you in one word, what's the word they would use to describe you?
I would hope that they would say happy right now.
Okay. I
It
like
took
the
it,
hope.
it
Hope.
happy was gone for a couple of years. And
Mm.
funny thing is, there's almost nothing, there's almost no boxes on my wall checked right now of all the things that I have going on. And I actually am enjoying the process of making things happen and not just looking at that finish line and standing there. So
Good, good. Well, I like happy. Happy's good. Okay, last question. We've talked about a lot of things, and as I said, I cannot thank you enough for being here. This has been a really great conversation for me personally, so I appreciate that. But people listening, if there was one thing that you hoped they would take away from this conversation, what would that one thing be?
check how you're looking at things. Check that lens that you're using to look at your own challenge, to look at somebody else in front of you, and check what is the lens that you're using. Is it all of the information that you do not have and you're a little cloudy on that lens? And can you just put a new lens in there that opens your eyes and your mind to a different perspective?
Love that. Love that. Well, as I said, I could sit here and we definitely could get into a ton of different conversations. So I really do appreciate this. So please tell everyone, and I'll list a lot of things in the show notes too, but tell people how they can connect with you, follow you, understand more about what you're doing for the blind community and all of us in general.
I believe, on every platform that I'm on, including TikTok, and that's pissing off my daughter that I'm getting pretty good at TikTok. I'm Kristin Smedley everywhere, and it's Kristin with an IN. Us INs are very particular that you don't spell it with an EN.
Right.
But it's Kristin Smedley pretty much everywhere. You can, the Thriving Blind community is big on Facebook, and thrivingblindacademy.org is the new platform that has launched and is gonna be, it's the game changer for this community. You can go on there and see the different programs. We're adding features all the time, the children's book, the film, it's all coming out there.
Great. And we'll link everything in the show notes. So again, thank you so much, folks. Please follow, please go listen to the TED Talk. Please get the book Thriving Blind. You will not, I will tell you, it will definitely change your views on just life in general. It is very well done. And like I said, I appreciate your time. So audience, you know the drill. Please understand there is someone in your network that could benefit from this conversation. Please make sure you share this out. Be that person that's going to pass it on and help others. As we ask all the time, please subscribe. Please rate the podcast. That helps us out there. And as always, there's a lot of places for you to consume content. But the fact that you spent time with Kristin and myself today, we both appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Kristin, for all you're doing. I wish you nothing but continued success. You are a blessing to everyone that you run across. And so for all of you, I will see you next week on another episode of You're in Charge. Now What? Thanks again. See ya.